There were two people. There were two Yidden, two Bachrim, actually, as a matter of fact. And they were talking about Mitzdayer. What do I mean? They were talking about Mitzdayer, Patim and Sukkah. Two Bachrim were discussing. One Bachar said, last night I slept in the Sukkah. And the other Bachar said, what? You slept in the Sukkah last night? It was freezing. You're ahead yet. So the other Bachar said, what? And all the great tzaddikim that they slept in the Sukkah when it was freezing. And this one said, don't you know Mitzdayer is Patim in a Sukkah? And the other one said, Mitzdayer? And isn't Mitzdayer? Isn't Sar and pain and anguish? Isn't that a Maila in a mitzvah? Don't we know? I mean, this is already me adding glib. I'm not sure how much the Bachar added at this point. But don't we know the Fum Tzara Agra? And right away, before we even begin the Shir, before we even begin the Sugya, the first shaila we have to ask is, Mitzdayer Pater from Sukkah? Did we ever hear of a Ptur anywhere in Kallus Kula of Tsar? Isn't Tsar a Maila when it comes to a mitzvah? The Fum Tzara Agra. What did the Heilige Chavetz Chaim say? There was a Bachar, an American Bachar, that was in Radin. There weren't too many of them. And there was an American Bachar in Radin. And the American Bachar in Radin one day was called in by the Chavetz Chaim. And the Chavetz Chaim was trying to give him chizik. And the Chavetz Chaim told him, he said to him, how many blat of Gemara did you learn today? So he said, I learned, second Seder, I learned a blat of Gemara. So the Chavetz Chaim said, no, you didn't learn a blat. He didn't know what the Chavetz Chaim wanted. Was he giving him musar that maybe he didn't learn it properly? And so he said to Chavetz Chaim, so was there a Shiva said, but I think I learned the blat. Chavetz Chaim told him, Taida Balcha from America, you learned 100 blat today. Because Echad Bitzar is Kimeya Shalai Bitzar. You came all the way from America. You left all the land of milk and honey, Rabbi Isai. And you went all the way here to learn Torah in Radin. Radin and Nishkahat indoor plumbing, Rabbi Isai. So you're learning Bitzar. So for you, it's not one blot that you learned today. It's 100 blot that you learned today. So we know that Tsar, when it comes to a mitzvah, Tsar is a Maila. Rabbi Isai, isn't that the whole side of this virtual Yarchei Kala Bichlal? That there was Eden Nebuch and the Eden are in Tsar. So we say Tsar, and we have to be sometimes behind closed doors, and we have to be locked up and cooped up. And as so what do Eden get together and they do? So we're going to learn Torah B'tzar. The only thing is that once the Olam over here got together and learned Torah B'frat with the help of the Aguda, God bless the Aguda. So then that Tsar turned into, they bathe in honey all day long. So by Yid, Tsar is not a siba to pater from a mitzvah. Tsar is a reason to go and do the mitzvah with more simcha and with more geschmack. So when a Yid hears these words, he hears Mitzdayer Pater min Sukkah. It's very difficult. It's very hard to understand. And we know Ad Kidei Kach, the Gemara tells us different cases of Tsar, maybe heat, maybe this. Yet we know the Gemara in Avodah Zarah tells us in Daf Gimel. The Gemara tells us that the Goyim, at the end of time, they're going to come, you didn't give us a chance. And the Gemara says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, do a mitzvah kala, go and take a sukkah and go into the sukkah. So they go into the sukkah, and you know what happens, the sun comes out. And when the sun comes out, so they go and they say, who needs all sukkah? They kick the sukkah. Okay, so the Taina they say, the Mefarshim explain, is why they have to kick the sukkah when they left. But the Chidor explains that taka by a goy, there's no p'tor of tsar. So already, this is very intriguing. By a guy, there's no putur of tsar from a mitzvah of sukkah, if you would have the responsibility to do the mitzvah of sukkah. But by Yid, there's a putur of the mitzvah of sukkah. Again, this is hard for us to understand. And by us, tsar is a reason to do the mitzvah. And then other Rabbi say, let's continue. Isn't the whole entire mitzvah of sukkah somewhat geboit and built on tsar to a certain extent? I mean, we know that the entire tachlis of the mitzvah of sukkah is to say midiras keva, leave your comfort zone, and to go into the area which is not as comfortable. And so obviously, tsar is an integral chelik of the mitzvah. We know that the Zohar talks about how the mitzvah of sukkah is leaving your home, your olam hazeh, going into Kallus. It's Kain Kallus. So obviously, it can't be that tsar is not going to be a factor. How could tsar be a siba to matir and to say a person's pater min sukkah, when the whole entire objective of the sukkah seems to be that we want the person to live a little outdoorsy, we want the comfort of your home, and to live betel da menusa, that the person could have just what's protecting me, just a Kadosh Baruch Hu. If the only thing that's protecting you is a Kadosh Baruch Hu, means your house is not doing its job. Of course, Avada, the Rebbeinu Shalom is the best protector, but if that's the idea of why you're going into the sukkah, in order to understand that reality, it means you're going out of a diras keva. And don't we know how many Yidden, when it came to the mitzvah sukkah, just you don't have to go so far back. You go back 50, 60 years ago in the projects in Williamsburg. How many people lived together in the sukkahs? They lived together, many, many families, and they had one communal sukkah. I ask you, was there not tzar to be in that sukkah? There was a little bit of tzar to be in that sukkah. The person had to eat without his wife. The person had to eat sometimes with the whole entire neighborhood. It's not always so geschmack to eat with the whole entire neighborhood. So l'chayra, the starting point of the shir is to try and figure out what bichlal is pshat in the statement of Omar Rava mitztayer is poter min hasukah. This is something which is against most of our chinuch. You have to schwitz for a mitzvah and adarabah lefum tzara agra, and to be a little bit more aggressive. L'chayra, it's mamish the opposite. L'chayra, it's mamish the opposite. However, we see in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Taf Ayin Beis, we see in Shulchan Aruch and Taf Ayin Beis Sif Yud that when it comes to wine and taka, we were zeicha to talk about this when this Murdik Kiddush Hashem started over kimat half a year ago. That was already Erev Pesach, Mahaltzach showing by Erev Sukkos, and whether Corona's here or COVID's here or whatever's here, but the Olam wants Torah, and that's the only thing that matters. It's Torah Kedusha. So when we started this 6 months ago, we spoke over there in Shulchan Aruch Siman Taf Ayin Beis Sif Yud. Over there, the Shulchan Aruch says that let's say you have a person that he drinks wine and he gets damaged from the wine. He gets tsar from the wine. The word tsar, he gets damaged. Tsar, he has tsar from the wine. And Yerushalmi brings down that Rabbi Yoina, not Rabbeinu Yoina, but Rabbi Yoina, he would drink wine for the Dalet Kaisis, and he would have a headache all the way, Gevein Till Shavuos. So, in such a case, the halacha is, are you mechuyev to drink the Dalet Kaisis? Hooray, you have tsar. You have tsar. Says the Shulchan Aruch, you mechuyev to drink the Dalet Kaisis. That's what it says in Shulchan Aruch. Are you going to have tsar? You're going to have a headache? Says the Shulchan Aruch, you're mechuyev to drink the Dalet Kaisis, even if you're going to have tsar. Siman Taf Ayin Beis Sif Yud. So you see that tsar is not a p'tur in the mitzvahs. More so. The Mishabura, Afanart, the Mishabura over there on the spot. What does the Mishabura say? Mishabura says, but what if you're going to become a chayla, she'ein by sakana? You're going to become somebody who's bedridden. I don't mean chas v'shalom p'koach nefesh, but you're going to become someone who's bedridden. So, B'kai Govna, says the Mishabura, then, you know what? Then you don't have to drink the Dalet Kaisis if it's going to make it that you're going to wind up in a bed. That's the Mishabura. Oh, so now we're seeing there is some kind of a p'tur. Says the Sharatzian, no, that's because I say, says the Sharatzian, because that would be ein derech cheres. The whole objective of drinking the Dalet Kaisis is that it should be derech cheres. It should be considered royalty and regal. A person that's going to become a chayla from the Dalet Kaisis, it's a stira to the actual mitzvah. If he's going to have tsar, then it wouldn't be. But what do you see? Listen to the Mishnah Berurah. If you're listening with a good ear, and it's not just the Mishnah Berurah and the Paiskim beforehand, the Mamshik and others, the Medayik from this idea that Rabbi say, when it comes to a mitzvah deraisa, here's a mitzvah derabanan by Dalet Kaisis, by us mitzvah sukkah is a mitzvah deraisa. When it comes to a mitzvah, you have to give your all. You have to go all the way until the point of not chalila sheyesh by sakana, but anything under. Even if a person day doing the mitzvah, he's going to become sick, even unless Dalet Kaisis, because there we say derech cheres, so it's not called derech cheres. But any other mitzvah, what's the obvious implication? You have to have tsar for a mitzvah, you have to have a chayli for a mitzvah, and that just like we know you have to give up 20% of your money for a mitzvah, so you have to give a little bit of shtik zich for a mitzvah. So this statement, mitzdayer, is pater from the mitzvah of sukkah, is something which is extremely, extremely difficult for us. And the truth is, when you start on Eid Hilchas Sukkah, you see this right away that it doesn't make sense minei obey in Sukkah. Is Rabbi say, when it comes to the mitzvah of Sukkah, says the Torah and many Mefarshim, what's the reason why the mitzvah of Sukkah, Taka, the Yontif of Sukkah comes out right now at this point of the year? The start of the winter, we'll call it, the start of the fall, I'll call upon him. But after the summer months, and wouldn't have made more sense. People all over in Eretz Yisrael, they're making minyanim outside. They have tents. They have, God's pergolas going. They got sukkahs the whole entire summer they had. So you see that sukkahs is taka very normal zach. It's up in taka in the summertime and certainly in the springtime. Wouldn't have made more sense that the yontif of sukkahs should come right after Pesach. So what's the pshat taka? That the yontif of sukkahs comes now, dafka, the start of the winter when it's starting to get cold, and we have to daven and pray to Hashem that we won't have rain, and it's a little bit cold outside. Says the Torah, because fakert, we wanted it to be nicker. We want the mitzvah of sukkah to be nicker. If a person would have to build a sukkah at a time when it was a normal thing to build a sukkah, it wouldn't be so nicker. But if he's building the sukkah at a time when it's not so normal to build a sukkah now, so then that show because it's a little bit cold. And because there's a little bit of tsar involved in going into the sukkah. So then it's very, very nicker that he's doing it not just to have a spatzir and to be outside. He's obviously doing it to be Mekayim, the Ratzon Hashem, and to be Zeicher for the Ananei HaKavod, v'chulei. But what do you see in the etzem chefetz of the mitzvah of sukkah? In the etzem chefetz of the mitzvah of sukkah is that a person should have a little bit of tsar. The foundation of the mitzvah of sukkah is leave your comfort zone, go outside, and there you're just with the Rebbeinu Shalom, with the Ushpizin, and that's it. Not with your gashmistic comforts of Olam Hazeh. And then you realize in life what's important and what's valuable. But Al Kapanim, you see that an integral part of the mitzvah is to have a little bit of tsar. Some Sefer Taka says, what happens if a person doesn't have a sukkah? Some Sefer says, go and build one, even if it costs money, and even if you're going to have to rent the place, you have to go out of your way to make sure you have it. That's a little bit of tsar, putting my hand into my pocket. That's a lot of tsar sometimes. So what's the pshat in this p'tur of mitzvah potem min sukkah? And there's no mishnayos. There's no mishnayos that say mitzvah is potem min sukkah. We have a mishnah that says that chayla is poter. We have a mishnah that says rain is poter. And I must tell you, Rabbi Isai, that there were Amoraim that clearly seem to take on that mitzvah is chayiv in the sukkah. The Ramah, the Mogen Avram in Tafresh Mem, Sivkot and Tezayin, the Mogen Avram brings down a Rav Huna from the Yerushalmi. That Rav Huna, he was once on the derech, and he needed a drink of water, and he wouldn't drink of water until he found the sukkah. I guarantee you, he was thirsty. I guarantee you, he's mitzdayer. Okay, there's Tamazoi. He was a holchei derech, and it was also water. He had all the reasons to be pater. But at least, you see one thing, he was mitzdayer. If there's like a hedyet and an isser to not eat when you don't have a sukkah and you're going to be considered someone who's a hedyet and a foolish person, so then certainly Rav Huna wouldn't have done this. So we see that the tour of mitzvah is not pashit. So Bez Hashem, let's start now slowly to try and figure out and to understand what is the tour of mitzvah. So the Gemara in Sukkah and Daf Chavav is not a Mishnah. That's our first introduction. The Gemara brings down that Rav permitted Rav Acha to sit in a canopy inside the sukkah because of the mosquitoes. So already we're getting our first lesson. In a canopy, say to B'Shainim, he certainly wasn't Yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah if he's sitting in there inside the chleis, a ganze oil. That's an oil b'toich sukkah. He's considered in a different place. We'll have to see why. Then why, if he was pater because of this tour of mitzvah, so why did he have to take his canopy inside the sukkah? No, that we'll have to try come back to Bez Hashem. Why didn't he just go into the house? But Al Kapanim, the Gemara says over there that the Kai Govna, he had a p'tur because of the mosquitoes. He was pater from sukkah. Now there, the Gemara is talking specifically about sleeping. We'll have to see soon, is there a p'tur of mitzvah when it comes to eating? But the Gemara is saying, when it comes to sleeping, there seems to be some type of a p'tur. When it comes to mosquitoes, you don't have to sleep in the sukkah if you're troubled by the mosquitoes. And the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara brings down Rava. Rava allowed Rav Acha bar Ada, a different Rav Acha. He allowed Rav Acha bar Ada to sleep outside of the sukkah because of the gargishta, some type of a dreadful odor. And the Gemara brings down, because Rava says mitzvah poter min sukkah. Again, it was only talking about sleeping, which is intriguing. We have to see. There's some type of tour that when you're mitzvah, you're in pain, you're suffering, you're poter min sukkah. What is this? And it seems to be only by sleeping. The Gemara continues, and the Gemara brings down the chayla and the meshamshin. Okay, it could be negay this year because the corona, not just chalila la'aleinu rachmana litzlan, but if somebody has corona and he needs somebody to help him out, so not only is he the chayla potter from the sukkah, but the meshamish is also potter from the sukkah. The person that's helping him out, if he's needed, he's potter from the sukkah. He's haisik b'mitzvah, he's a potter min mitzvah. So over there, the Gemara brings down that chayla meshamshim are potter. Okay, so the Gemara is medayik chayla meshamshim are potter. The chayla is potter. That's aggressive. That's a chayli. Mashma, regular mitzvah, which is a lesser level. Chayla is a very big level. It sounds like a regular mitzvah is chayiv. So that's already a shayla the Gemara asks. And the Gemara says that can't be because we know mitzvah is potter min sukkah. Now right away, there's a kasha. Why didn't the Gemara, when it asks this question, why didn't the Gemara ask on rain? Rain's a Mishnah. Rain's a Mishnah that rains potter. So we know there's some type of a p'tur. So we're going to have to try to come back to this. Right? The Gemara asks from Rava. Rava says mitzvah is potter min sukkah, but it sounds like chayla is potter, not mitzvah. But again, this is a makor. Mitzvah potter min sukkah. The Gemara Chavei brings down an ovel is chayiv in a sukkah. A person that's in an avel, he's chai. Frek the Gemara, what's the chiddush and avel's chai in all the mitzvahs? So Gemara says, no, I would have a mina that he's potter because he has a lot of tsar. And Mistayr is potter in a sukkah. Kamash Malon says the Gemara, boila suve daita. No, now it's Yontif. Now you have to calm down. But there's a havamina that he's potter because Mitzdayer is potter in the sukkah. It can't be Mitzar inside the sukkah. The Gemara Chavches brings down that when it comes to learning, when it comes to learning, Kamai, relaxing in the sukkah, what's the greatest relaxation that there is? Learning Torah. So Kamai, that relaxation you have to do in the sukkah, you have to learn Torah in the sukkah. So Gemara has to kasha, but we find that you don't have to learn Torah in the sukkah. So Gemara says, Ian and Bekiyas. When it comes to Ian, you need a cup. Ian, you need to have concentration. And Ian is something that's difficult to learn in the sukkah because you're mitzdayer. Shein can be kiyas, go and learn in the sukkah. But again, these are the Mekoros of mitzdayer. One last Mekor is the Gemara Sukkah Daf Chavtes. Gemara brings down that Rabbi Yosef was an istinus. And Rabbi Yosef saw a piece of schach falling in. He got all and he ran out of there. It's the sky is falling. So he ran out of there. I'm a mitzdayer, I'm an istinus, I'm patim in a sukkah. And the Yerushalmi in Beis Yud says heat is a p'tor and flies are a p'tor, and it's not just rain. So we definitely have enough Mekoros to tell us that Mitzdayer is pater min sukkah. Now, what's the pshat? Why is Mitzdayer pater min sukkah? Rabbi said there's no p'tor of learning pater because you're Mitzdayer. What does the Gemara say in Chulin? Chash b'roishay yasek b'teira. What happens when the going gets tough? Go learn. Is there a p'tor of Mitzdayer pater min davening? No such thing. Go daven. That's what you should do when you're not well. So Tosfos on Daf Chavav explains to us, and this is the side of today, and so to the Meiri says this, and so to the Chinuch and the Yereim, they tell us it comes from the pasuk of Teishvu Ke'ein Taduru, that when you sit in the sukkah, it has to be like you're sitting in your house. It has to be Kimoi, this becomes your house. Now, usually that is something which is being mechayiv, it's extending the mitzvah. Usually when we say Teishvu Kein Taduru, it's coming to tell us that not only are you chayiv in the sukkah to eat to this, no, relax in there and learn in there and hang out in there. Teishvu Kein Taduru, it's coming to add the mitzvah. Here, Tosfos is teaching us that Teishvu Kein Taduru is coming to also be magbil the mitzvah. It's coming to limit the mitzvah. And it's coming to say that the only time that you have the chayiv of sukkah is when it's like your house, when it's the comfort level of your house. But if it's a situation where you would leave your house, so then you'd also be allowed to leave the sukkah. If the sukkah gets to the point of where you'd leave your house, so then that already is no longer doimit to your house. And the sukkah is your dira sarai, but dira nonetheless. So it has to be kamay yadira's keva. And the Ritva in Kaf Chesam and Beis, he says it a little different. He learns from the pasuk of Kol Ezrach B'Yisrael. He asks on the pasuk, why do you need an Ezrach? An Ezrach means a citizen. A citizen is a reference to somebody who's comfortable in that place. Right? It is an American citizen. So he's comfortable in that place. Kol Ezrach B'Yisrael. So what's the pshat in Ezrach? Says the Ritva, Ezrach is somebody who he's comfortable there. He belongs there. He's settled there. He's settled there. So B'Mela says the Ritva, it has to be that you're an Ezrach, called Ezrach B'Yisrael. It has to be you're settled in the sukkah. It has to be a comfortable matzav in the sukkah. But if you have a situation of where there's star, so then that's not comfortable. So therefore, now we start to understand a little bit. Other mitzvahs, there is no heter of tsar, and the fum tsar agra. Here, by the mitzvah of sukkah, tsar is a definition of the actual tsuras ha-mitzvah. The tsuras ha-mitzvah is make sure that the house that you're living in for these 8 days, for these 7 days, is a house which is comfortable like your home. Obviously, the level of comfort is not going to be like your home because that's the mitzvah of sukkah. But on the other hand, there's a definition here. By other mitzvahs, lulav, there's no p'tor of mitzvah because the definition of the mitzvah is take the lulav, take the esrog. Here, the definition of the mitzvah is teishvu kein taduru. So therefore, there's a p'tor of mitzvah not because of some side sar, I'm in pain, and therefore I don't have to do the mitzvah. No, if you're bitzar, and we'll see soon, if it's a tsar coming from the sukkah per se, but if you're bitzar, so then you're not shaykh to be mekayim the mitzvah, and now you understand, it has to be a tsar coming from the sukkah. If you stam have a tsar, for example, says the Mordechai Reim in Tafchin Mem, let's say you have a mitzvah, he has a toothache or something like that, he has a tsar or something like that. Says the Mordechai, it has to be a zatzar. This is Gepaskin in Shulchan Aruch, like the Olam saw, the Talmidei Chachamim, in Tafresh Mem, and the Ramon Siv Dalet. It has to be such a tzar that when I leave my sukkah, the tzar goes away. The tzar is removed. But if it's a zatzar that when I leave my sukkah, the tzar doesn't go away, so then why shouldn't you at least Mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah? A person has a toothache. So he says, okay, I have a toothache, I'm pater from the mitzvah. Are you pater from lulav? Are you pater from learning? What are you talking about? If you have a toothache, go learn. If you have a toothache, go to the sukkah. But if you have something that when I'm going to leave the sukkah, it's going to alleviate my tsar, because the tsar is obviously coming machmas, the being in the sukkah, or machmas, the sukkah itself. That is now the definition of the mitzvah. The definition of the mitzvah is teishvu ke'ein taduru, that you should have the tsuras mitzvah of a comfort zone. Again, albeit it's not the comfort zone you're used to, and that's say Midiras Keva, and go to your Diras Sarai. And that's why it's Gullus, and that's why Taka, it is Nicker. Avada, it's not the same. But it's got to be at least a Diras Sarai, which has the level of comfort that I wouldn't leave my house if I had this problem in my house. That's the Etzim Zog, and that's the Etzim Sugya. And now we just have to try to figure out the Gedarim of this. We have to try to figure out the Gedarim. But now you appreciate the Havamin of the Gemara by an Oval. Said the Marik in Kuf Ayin Ches, that he said, the Marik asked the Kasha, what's the Havamina by an Oval, that an Oval should be potter from the Sukkah? Lefi, what we just said, an Oval, why should the Oval be potter from a Sukkah? An Oval is upset because he lost his mishpacha, he's got terrible agmas nefesh, so what's it going to help to go inside? So the Achrayim answer the Marik, and they say, no, you're right. Avada, if it would be the same level of tsar, inside, outside, there's no havamina that an oval would be potter from the sukkah. But it's talking about it's sukkah, it's yontiv, it's freilich, and there's people around, and the oval doesn't want to be in this festive matzav. He's sad. So Mamela, the sukkah is causing his tsar. So what's the kamash malon? The Gemara, kamash malon. No, now it's sukkahs. Now it's yontiv. So you're not allowed to have this tsar. But what was the havamina? The havamina was, albeit that the tsar is not from the walls of the sukkah, but there's something about being in the sukkah which is causing me to have tsar. The companionship in the sukkah is not what he's looking for. He's an oval right now, Rachmana litzlan. Komash malon, that no, you have to calm down. It's yontif, and simcha freilich dein taka mit the yontif. But it's only if the sukkah is generating the star, the smell, the bugs, all those types of zachin. And now you have a little bit of an understanding. And let's go. Let's see the various cases that come up. For example, the truth is the Mordechai adds a point. Not only that the tsar is coming from the sukkah, and not only that when I go inside, the tsar will be relieved. Otherwise, you have no heter to do it. But the Mordechai adds in the kud over here. He says, because of this, so then you got to be very careful before you say these words. You got to be very careful before you say, oh, I'm a mitzdayer. Why? I can't sleep here. Why? Because look, if I sleep here, this place is not shaykh b'chlal to sleep. It's freezing cold outside. I'm not shaykh. The Ganovim are here. How can I sleep in the sukkah? I'm afraid if we're going to wake up in the morning, I'm not going to be here. The Ganovim are going to take me. They're going to come into my sukkah. What are they going to take? A picture of Rav Elyashiv and Rav Chaim Kanievsky, okay? But, then after they get rid of that picture, the next Ganovim, they're going to take me. So, you're afraid to sleep there. Says the Mordechai, be very careful before you say that. Be very careful. Why? Because, if you made a sukkah in an oifen that it's not roy to sleep in, so he says, so then it's not strategically built well. So then, that's a taina. You can't build a sukkah in a way that you're going to be a mitzdayer patim in a sukkah. That's called you didn't build a sukkah. And he adds, any sukkah that is not roy to eat in or to sleep in, that's not already called a dira. Who has a house that he's only able to eat in, but not able to sleep in? And this taka is gepaskmed by the Ramah. It's the same idea. The Teishvu King Tadur over here is creating a new chumrah. Till now, we spoke about Teishvu King Tadur, which is creating a kula. But now Teishvu King Tadur is saying, wait a minute, I believe in Teishvu King Tadur. If I build a house, it has to be a house that I can be able to sleep in, and it has to be a house that I'm able to eat in. Now, it's interesting, the Shara Tshuva brings down, let's say you have one sukkah that you sleep in on a merpesa, and on a porch, and that, the Genovim, they're not climbing up. And you have another sukkah that you eat in. So that's already okay, because that's normal for a person to do that. He has one room that he sleeps, he has one room that he eats. That wouldn't bother us. But if you made a sukkah that you can't sleep in, so come to gain the Ramah, and he's very bothered by this, that this is already not considered Teishu Kain to do. Now, the Mai said this is not our sugya. It is not our sugya. The Mishabura brings down a Chayim that argue. There's a Chacham Tzvi. There's a very nice Aruch HaShulchan. Aruch HaShulchan says, listen, that's all if I built a sukkah, let's say right by a garbage, and it smells over there. So that's a taina. You have a sukkah that you right away building in an oifen where you're going to be mitzvah patim in a sukkah. Or let's say you have a sukkah where you build in a way that you find out afterward that, you could have built it over there, but you build it over here. And over here, it's access to the Ganovim. And that's no good. That's a problem. But let's say you live in a place and you're scared to sleep outside. And everywhere in that place, you're scared to sleep outside. Or let's say everywhere in that place, it's too cold to sleep outside. So he said, so what would a person do if he lived in the North Pole? So he would have to build a house and he'd have to get whatever he can get. So if that's your only option, says the Aruch HaShulchan, so then already it's not so pashut, this ganze Ramah, but that's not our sugya. But Al-Kapam, you certainly have to build a sukkah in a way where everyone seems to agree. The Rosh brings down in Sifyud Beis, he says everyone agrees that you have to build a sukkah in an oifen that it's not going to push you out of the sukkah in the middle of sukkah. The Rosh asks the question, what's pshat in those Amaroyim? They had mosquitoes, they had the smell. So he says, you have to say the smell came because when the rain hit the schach, it started to smell. It wasn't something expected. Last year, I had one of my mispalim in the shul. Last year, they made these underground garbages in Eretz Yisrael that you see all over the place now. And they had built it right before Yontif. And he built a sukkah right near there. And Lamaisa, before Yontif, it was fine. There's absolutely no smell. On Yontif, there was a problem with those garbages. They eventually fixed it. But there was a problem with those garbages where they'd put it in a certain way, and the garbage, unbeknownst to everybody, was basically leaking through under the ground and whatever, got some ice. So that was something that came up on the Yontif. He did not build his sukkah in a way that it should smell. He built his sukkah in a way where it should be a good sukkah. And it was a good sukkah, and the smell came later on. So this is the Gedarim. These are the attack of the Gedarim. And now the Rosh quotes another Nekuda, and the Rosh says a very nice thing. The Rosh says that now you understand that what's the diak in the Gemara, that all the cases of the Gemara, Mitzvah Patim in a Sukkah, we're talking about sleeping. All the cases of Mitzvah Patim in a Sukkah, we're talking about the Rava pattered him from sleeping, and Ravada Baracha and Ravada, they were pattered from sleeping. He brings a Sefer Mitzvahs, that the Sefer Mitzvah says, no, it's only sleeping that you're pater from, not eating. The Korban Estanil explains because sleeping is something which takes a very long time. So it's much more shaykh to be a bit dire. Mashen Kain eating is something that doesn't take so long. So the Rebbe say, on that, we're not going to say mitzvah pater min sukkah. The Rosh goes on, as you all know, to argue on that. And he says, Adrabba, I think sleeping in a sukkah is the chiddush of the Gemara, that you're pater in a situation of where you are mitztayer. That's a bigger chiddush, because we know that sleeping is much more mechayev in a sukkah than eating. You're not going to find in the Mishnayos about eating in the sukkah. The examples of the Chazal were always sleeping, because there's no sleeping that you're allowed to do outside the sukkah. Okay, that's probably a part of a different shir. What's the pshat? There are people that don't sleep in a sukkah. Some people think that sleeping in a sukkah is a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz. It's not exactly our side, but there are heterim and whatnot. It's not for now. But upon him, you see, says the Rosh, it's not true. If they say sleeping as a p'tur of mitztayer, so kol shekain, the kol sleeping is more mechayev, kol shekain, that eating as a p'tur of mitztayer. And that's him, the ganze sugi over here. So what's taka the chiddush of Rava, mitztayer pater min sukkah? Don't I know it from rain, from the Mishnayos? So the answer is very simple. The answer is rain is a riza getzar. Rabbi say a couple drops of rain and you can't bear it. No, mashen kain mitztayer, that's a much bigger chiddush. Who says that level of tsar? Rava was mechadish, even the level of tsar of mosquitoes, even the level of tsar. Rain, once it starts raining there, it's not shaykh to live there, it's not shaykh to sleep there, it's not shaykh anything. And that was mechadish Rava, it's not just rain. Any level of tsar. Now we have to figure out what level of tsar. The truth is, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a Geshmak Ezach. The Goyin has a different answer to this kasha, very famous Goyin. The Goyin says, do you know why when it rains in the sukkah, that's not a raya to Rava? Rava said mitzvah pater min sukkah. Obviously, the Goyin is a cryptic message, and you have to decipher it. But this is the understanding of the Vilna Goyin. the Goyin says, why is it that Rav is Mechadish Tos Mitzdayer is Potter Min HaSukkah? HaRav, we know rain is Potter, that's a Mishnah. What was Rav Mechadish? Says the Goyin, no. When it rains, the Sukkah is not a Sukkah. That's the Goyin's Chiddush. The Goyin holds that when it's raining in the Sukkah, it's not a Sukkah b'chlal. It doesn't have a Chefta Sukkah. That's why there's no mitzvah Sukkah. It's not a P'tur. Something that rain is coming in is not a Sukkah. A Sukkah is something that is protecting you. If it's not protecting at all, that's not called a Sukkah. And the Goyin therefore goes, Rava was Mechadish Gevaldik Chiddush. That Mitzdayer, of course, is called a Sukkah. You have a Sukkah, it's a little hot in the Sukkah, or it's very hot in the Sukkah, there's mosquitoes in the Sukkah, whatever, there's loud noise in the Sukkah. It's still a Sukkah. It's still protecting. Elamai, you have a problem. There's a Mitzdayer problem. That's a Gevaldik Chiddush of Rava. And that's the famous Vilna Goyin. Very, very famous. He has a Chiddush, the Goyin based on this. Everybody knows that on the first night of Sukkah, if it rains, chas v'chalila, so we have shittas that hold there's no p'tur of mitzdayer. Like I said, this is part of a different shir, but there's no p'tur of mitzdayer on the first night. On the first night, we don't have a p'tur of mitzdayer. And the Rashba says that he doesn't understand. Why shouldn't there be a p'tur of mitzdayer on the first night, right? And the Goyin, as a middle shita, the Goyin says, on the first night, if it rains in the Sukkah, he says, it's not called the Sukkah. If it's not called the Sukkah, so then of course you can't be Makayim the mitzvah Sukkah on the first night. What's nafkamina? Nafkamina, there was once a father and a son. They braved the rain. It was raining on the night of Sukkot, and they braved the rain because what could you do? You have to eat something. So they ate a kazai, a kibay in the Sukkah, and then they went to sleep inside. It was pouring rain. What could you do? Middle of the night, the father wakes up and he tells his son, quick, we can go to the Sukkah. It stopped raining. So the son says to the father, Manashach. If mitzdayer on the first night is not potter, so then we anyways ate in the sukkah. We ate there when it was raining, and mitzdayer is not a p'tur. Okay, and if mitzdayer is potter, so then I'm sleeping right now, and you're waking me up, ta. So then I say mitzdayer is potter from a sukkah. So what's the reason you're waking me up? So the truth is, the Mishabura Taka says such a cheshbon. But if you add this Goyin, so then there'd be a little logic that the father could say back to the son. The Goyin says that no. Yingala, when it's raining, it doesn't have a shame of a sukkah b'chlal. So if it's raining, that's why we, that shita is the shita that pattered us before. So when we ate there, we were unnecessarily eating there. But mitzdayer, you don't have a p'tur on the first night of sukkah, so let's go to the sukkah. That's an extra. That was a little bit of icing on your cake. And all this Rabbi says in Shulchan Aruch. Tafresh Lamed Tesiv Dalet says about the learning, that if you can't learn, you can't concentrate. The Mitzdayer Potter, if it's raining, is in Siv Hey, and Tafresh Mem Siv Dalet is talking about general P'tur of Mitzdayer, and Siv Hey and Tafresh Mem is talking about an oval, and that he's not Potter. All these are mefurish in the Shulchan Aruch. Comes again the Ramah, and the Ramah says it's got to be Derech B'nei Adam to be Mitzdayer. It's got to be something that's normal that people are Mitzdayer from. And it can't be your thing. Now, what's this? Mishabur says, well, we'd say but ladaite. The Magen Avraham says, whoa, what about anine das? An istinus, like Rabbi Yosef. So the Magen Avraham says it has to be a known istinus. Now, the Sha'ar Tzion does not seem to go like that. And he says, if you claim you're an istinus and you can't bear the smell, even if you're not a known istinus, so then you also have the p'tur of mitzdayer, pater min hasukah. So what are the cases? So odor, that's a Gemara Mefureshes, right? God, you can't build it in such an oifen, right? People in the sukkah. I want to take a nap. Sometimes it's nagay in the afternoon. I want to take a nap. There's a billion people in the sukkah. There's guests in the sukkah. It's embarrassing for me to sleep in the sukkah in front of people. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he says, no, the Kahai Govna, that's potter. Why? Because taka, nobody wants to sleep in front of other people, and that would be a mitzdayer, pater min hasukah, and my tsar will go away. It'll be alleviated if I go inside. So memela, you have the heter mitzdayer, pater min hasukah. What if you have somebody, he's a groi sayid? What I mean is a groi sayid? I mean, he's not Zayin al Zayin Tfachim Rabbi Yisai. He's like Zayin al Zayin Amis, Gevenlach. I mean, a groi sayid. So now, he wants to tell you, how can I sleep in the sukkah? A lot of times in Eretz Yisrael, they give you a little roof that you lift off, a little roof, and it's mamish zayin al zayin. And you have to sleep in there, and you have to sleep in there with, sometimes you have, the person has like a small family, 19 or 20 children, and he has to get them all in this sukkah. They lift up the roof. How do you do it? That's true. Your legs could be sticking out of the sukkah. That's okay. As long as your right shaykh ruba is in the sukkah and your legs are sticking out, that's fine. But sometimes even that's not shaykh. So at what point do we say, does he have to curl up and be a mitzdayer patim in a sukkah? Listen to a davar nifla. Kum tzegei the trumas hadeshin in Siman Tadi Beis. And he says he's chayiv. If you're in a sukkah of Zayin al Zayin, I don't care if you're too big for the sukkah, you're still chayiv. What's this all about? He's mitzdayer. He doesn't want to sit all curled up like this. So he says, not just by eating. He says, and by the way, be careful. Because if you say, I can't sleep in this sukkah, so then maybe it's not called for you a sukkah for eating. You have to be careful with this. So what's this all about? So the Maisa, he says, no. Have you ever been on an airplane? It's like the Truma Sadashan. No, how do you sleep on an airplane? You get all like this and like that, and you call up the Yanafis and those like that. No. And how many people do it? And they pay big money for it. You know? So when you have to sleep curled up, you sleep curled up. Come to gain the Taz, and he says, what's going on here? But Lamaisa Mitzdayer is Patim in Sukkah. And he says, this is I'm a Maridi Bishtoimim, he said. But Lamaisa Rabbi said, the Ramah and most Achrayim Paskin, like this, Trumat Adeshin, that you don't have a right to say, I'm Mitzdayer Patim in Sukkah. Now, what's this? This is very intriguing. Kum to gain Goyin Rishleim Zalmin. In the 9th Perek, I think Alicha Shleima in the 18th hour over there. And he says, listen to us, Moiridiki Said Rabbi Isai. He says mitzdayer, and this is such a big insight and answers up most of the questions that we spoke about today. He says mitzdayer is only if there's something exterior to the sukkah, not the hefts of sukkah. If the sukkah is giving the sar, that's not mitzdayer. What do I mean? Let's say I have a person, he says, I can't eat outside. Proper mensch, I can't eat outside. I can never eat outside. It's not how I eat. I get terrible tsar eating outside. I have to eat in my living room on my living room table. I can't. I have to eat on my living room table as my dinner. My breakfast has to be on my kitchen table. I can't eat outside. I have tsar. That is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is leave your diras keva and go to the diras sarai. You can't say that's what's called. I hate being in a sukkah. Let's say every Yid, he says, I can't stand being in the sukkah. I don't like it. I feel vulnerable. I feel like I'm outside. That is the mitzvah sukkah. If the sukkah is what's giving you pain, that's no heter. That's from Tzara Agra. That goes back to the regular klal of the mitzvah, etc., etc. But Mashain Kain, if the tzar is exterior, the sukkah has now bugs. That sukkah doesn't have to have bugs. The sukkah doesn't have to have heat. The sukkah doesn't have. I say, Bizai, says Rosh Hashanah, that's shot in the Ramah. That's shot in the Trumas Hadeshin. That's the answer to the Taz. When the sukkah Chazal were begalatos, Zayin al Zayin is a viable size for a sukkah. So that means Chazal said that size is enough of a structure, then that's the mitzvah. You have to be able to make the mitzvah in there. You can't say that size is no good for me. It's too small for me. That's the mitzvah. That's the mitzvah. The only time you can say mitzvah patim and sukkah is when there's something else exterior that would get me to leave. But if the size is too small, Chazal said not like that. Rabbi said, Zayin al Zayin, the people, I don't know, Niskat nu abayim. Maybe you say the people also shrunk. The people also grew. About Kapanim, Zayin al Zayin is also quite small. And therefore, the Maisa, that's a tremendous Havana. It's also difficult to go all the way downstairs from the top floor in a Williamsburg project to the sukkah downstairs. But that's what the Chefza of sukkah is, to go from the upstairs to the downstairs, from the inside to the outside. Now, there is an Ar Shalom. He says, listen, if the fellow doesn't fall asleep, so that, he can't fall asleep because he's in this matziv, then he's Aninei Das, and then he might have a heter. But like we said, just like he's able to sleep on the plane, somehow he manages. So then I say that would not be enough of a reason to be called a mitzdayer, patim in a sukkah. Now, this Rabbi say it's also quite geschmack. The hemshich of the hemshich, you have to make sure it has to be something which is the hemshich of the Ramah. He says it's got to be something. After he says this line that size is not enough of a reason to pater, he says it also has to be something derech b'nei adam to be mitzdayer from. You can't abuse this heter, Rabbi say. You have to. So where can we apply it? So what if it's boiling hot? Now, Rabbi say it's interesting. Heat is not a new thing. A microwave does a nayazach. The hot plate gewöhnlich does a nayazach. So I don't have a kasha that the Gemara never talk about it. But heat is nicht nayazach. How come the Gemara talks about mosquitoes, and how come the Gemara talks about regen, the rain, and the Gemara the heat? Heat is a very normal thing. Okay, so you could say, in Europe, heat wasn't such a normal thing on Sukkot, but the Gemara wasn't written in Europe, Rabbi Isai. The Gemara geschrieben in Bavel in Eretz Yisrael, so over there it was very hot. So how come no one talks about heat? On the other hand, we know that Ksuvas Taflamid Chazal tell us that heat is worse than cold. Whoever remembers, we spoke at the Yachikala years ago about the Amir La'akum, the heter of Amir, that was in the other Yachikala, Amir Yachikala, about how Amir La'akum, there's a heter of a guy doing shvus to maybe turn on an air conditioning, and it's learned from the fact that maybe a guy is allowed to turn on the heat because the pain of heat is worse than cold. Rabbi Isai, I don't know if you know what's going on there. It's Israel. So Kanai Nahura, I got into a heat wave over here, Rabbi Isai. I mean, it's like so Kanai Nahura these few days has been, and the next few days also given. So heat is ganz not push it. So what's the pshat? We know heat is worse. So then if heat, whether Rebbe when he gave Antoninus a bracha, he said, "Oh, you heat otzen that you should be saved from the cold." Rebbe said, Antoninus said, "Das a bracha, a bracha. I mean, I could just put on a jacket." But then Rebbe told him, "Oh, you're right. So you should be saved from the heat, because he just has a fill, but he can take off, even a Roman guy." So you see, heat is very schrecklich. So l'chayr, there should be a p'tur of mitzvah potter. V'afal piken, there's no gemara, no shulchan aruch. What's the pshat? I don't know if this is such a kasha though, Rabbi Isai. You know why? Because what was the fellow going to do, Rabbi Isai? He was going to leave his sukkah and go where? Into his house where it was hotter. So then there's no p'tur of mitzvah. But today, we have an air conditioning. So then avada, if a person taka, he's boiling in the sukkah and he's not enjoying the sukkah, again, you got to be careful before you make these decisions. And remember, it's a mitzvah yikara. But al kapanim, that would definitely today be a heter of mitzvah potam in a sukkah. But again, please be very careful, Rabbi Isai, before you use this heter. Why did the Chidah tell us that a guy, when it came to the heat, it got so hot that Rebbeinu Shalom brought out the sun and the goyim kicked the sukkah? So the Chidah says a guy doesn't have the heter of mitzvah potam in a sukkah. You know why? Because a guy is an eved, and an eved has to work. So the Rebbe says there's no. Ayid is azin, ayid azun, ayid a ben, ayid is like a kind. He's a chachka. He's your child. He's your Rebbeinu Shalom's child. So the Rebbe says HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants him to be comfortable in the mitzvah. So there is a p'tur, but just remember, before you run out, remember you're a ben by the Rebbeinu Shalom. Very cold. If it's very cold, Taka, in Bavel and Eretz Yisrael, it was not very cold. The Bach brings down in Russia, it was, yes, very cold in Ruslan. And that, of course, would be a p'tur. However, he says an interesting thing. He says, if you're an ani, you'll have a bigger p'tur. Because an aniyim don't have blankets. But the obvious implication, and brought in Tafresh Lametes, in Sibbeis, the Ramah brings down, this is the reason why there were many people that Taka didn't sleep outside, right? Because it's not getting to Duru, to sleep outside in the freezing cold. But Lamaisa, together, you have to say is, what would I do if the steam in my house was broken? Would I leave if the steam in my house is broken? Okay, sleeping obviously is a lot more difficult because sleeping a person gets sick, etc. But if you could put in a heater, obviously, boyfriend, that's not dangerous. So the Nevada, and if you could put on blankets, the Nevada. Was the Meisim with the Kapishna Rebbe when the Kapishna Rebbe Yeshua Heschel, when he was very, very ill. So then the Mishpacha knew he was going to sleep in the sukkah. By him, the mitzvah of sukkah was mamish ad klois nafshay mamish. So they went to the Rabbi Eilish, they went to the Satmar Rebbe to ask the Satmar Rebbe to come to tell the Kapishna and Nitzah schluffen in the sukkah because they knew for him it would be dangerous. The Satmar Rebbe came and he came inside. The second he got to the door, the Kapishna said, "Oh, Rebbe, red nicht weg in the sukkah. Ich bete euch, red nicht weg in the sukkah." So Rebbe said, and he left. Ramosha Zechron Levracha in Chelik Ches, there's a whole pages about describing Ramosha. It says over there, Ramosha Taka had Moiridik and Mesiras Nefesh about sleeping in the sukkah himself, because he held that his father Taka got sick from sleeping in the sukkah. Most people think also because of that, Dafka wouldn't be makbid to sleep in the sukkah. I'm not saying no one should get sick for shteitzach. That zikr goes without saying, but just at least it should at least be a ganze cheshbon before a person leaves the sukkah for heat or for cold or for chulei. But you have to be careful that the Bir Halacha speaks out over here in Sif Dalet. If you wind up staying in the sukkah and it's cold, says the Bir Halacha, be careful. Make sure you're bundled up and make sure you're warm, because otherwise you're going to make a bracha and you're freezing cold and you taka mitzvah and you taka potter and it's taka bracha v'tala and it's taka your head it. So, you have a lot. You're on a tightrope, Rabbi Isai. Don't just jump out of the sukkah, but if you're in the sukkah, make sure that you're enjoying it. What happens, says the B'kur Yankiv in Kavches, if the food congeals, So he says that's a vada mitzvah patim sukkah. It's freezing cold, but the Kapani says to do something that it shouldn't congeal. The same attitude. You don't want to be patim from this mitzvah yikara, this mitzvah kala. If somebody by mistake on Yontif, this is one of the, unfortunately, but that's the mitzvah of the sukkah. Somebody walks, he accidentally pulls out the plug. So to get a guy to turn on the light, that's a problem. Ends don't justify the means. You got no heter to get a mir la'akum. But to go sit in the sukkah now, are you mechuyev to sit in the sukkah in the dark? It's pitch black. So the Trumas Hadashin says no. It's not a normal thing for a person to sit in the dark. It's very unenjoyable to sit in the dark. And therefore, that would certainly be a reason that we would say he's a mitzvah and he's put him in a sukkah. Do I have to go to my neighbor, says the Trumas Hadashin, when it's pitch black in the sukkah? So he says, listen, to go to a neighbor, he says, look, if it's not so much tircha and it's not so embarrassing, no, zicher, right? And the HaEysonim in Kuf Mem Zayin Sif Yud Aleph, he says, listen, if you could overcome your busha, go there, you'll be able to make a bracha. It's not like rain. This is something self-imposed. But if you're mamish, mavayish, I'm going to go to a neighbor, it's so uncomfortable, and it's like a shmak, and it's a tremendous amount of tircha. So, no, that tircha, the B'kur Yankiv in Sif Katan Yud Gimel, he says, if it's a small tircha, just packing up your stuff, so then once you get there, it'll be, but if it's mamish, again, it's a tircha, and it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable, you just have to be careful with this, Rabbi Yisai. The Mishabura brings this. The Patel Chachma has a case of a fellow that while he was eating, he eats in a very funny way. He's got a problem. He had some type of a mum. He said, that's embarrassing. Every bite, he's suffering. Sometimes he just has to, overcome his busha. And then once he overcomes his busha, he's going to enjoy his meal while he's there. If he's going to overcome his meal, if he's going to overcome his busha while he's there, he'll enjoy his meal. Then it's not like bees. Then it's not like mosquitoes. Then it's a whole different story. Because then once he'll be there, he'll be comfortable. And a Hanami, it's going to be tircha to go there, and he's going to have to overcome himself. But that's Kallus, and that's the tircha, that's the from Tzara Agra. Look, I guess together would be, what happens? A person, he's out of town, and he's he's in some place, he doesn't know where he is, he's looking around, he needs he needs to have a coffee. It's early in the morning, and he's out of town, and he has nowhere to stop off. And let's say he's makbid Chal Yisrael, and so what would he do? He would look around for the first door with a mezuzah. Would he knock on the door? Okay, so that's not a raya, maybe, because maybe that's very uncomfortable. But maybe a shachin, maybe sometimes a shachin is even more uncomfortable than that, or maybe less uncomfortable. But these are the cheshbainis that he has to make, and that's how he has to be kaveya. Now, l'maisa, I'm going to tell you a very interesting halacha. This is not so known, and it's quite interesting. When it's raining, to sit in the sukkah, l'chayra, it's a hedyet, he's not chayiv. The guy says it's not a sukkah. And Ad Kedei Kach, the Shvus Yankiv says that if it's dripping down after the rain, that's also mitzvah. It's still dripping. Who cares if it's raining from Shemayim? Who cares if it's raining from the schach? But he says, go out of your way and make sure you have a shlak. You have something that covers the rain. Now, Baisa, I'm going to tell you a chiddush. It's definitely a chiddush, but it's brought down in Tafresh Chavtes, at the end of Tafresh Chavtes, yes, by the Mishnah Berurah, by the Magen Avraham, the Maksar Shekel, the Prima Godim, the Graz. It's very, very interesting halacha. There's a machloikes. If you have a sukkah that was built bekashrus, and then afterward you put on it a cover, but it was built bekashrus, so then there's a machloikes, and there's a shita that holds. When is it a problem if you put on a shlak on some type of covering? That's if that came first, and that was giving you the shade. But let's say the sukkah was giving me shade from a kosher sukkah, and then afterward I put on this puzzle piece to block the rain. Says the Mishnah Berurah, there's a shita that's mekel, and the Mishnah Berurah, not so known to people, says, so if you have that massive, sit in the sukkah with the shlak. Don't make a bracha, because it's a machlekes. And also, this doesn't apply probably to a roof that comes down, because a roof that comes down, that's a whole different chefza. If you have just a shlak and you put it on top, so then that is something that, according to many shitas, you yoytze the mitzvah sukkah, and that's one of the very big benefits of having a shlak and having something that could cover the sukkah. And then don't make a bracha in that sukkah, but you can continue eating your meal. Obviously, if it just rolls straight onto the schach, it's not even a problem on Yontif. You're allowed to pull it out even on Yontif. It wouldn't be a problem of building an oil. Now, L'maisa, tachlis geret, what's the hagdara What's the Agdar of Mitzdayer Pater Min Sukkah? What do I mean? I mean, there's a famous tshuva from Rav Moshe in Chele Gimel and Siman Tzadi Beis. The guy Rav Moshe is describing over there that the Ptur of Holchei Drachim is a Ptur only if he's doing something like Rashi says, he's going for Schleira, he's going for some type of a important reason. But Stam Tiyul, then you don't have the Ptur of Holchei Drachim Pater Min Sukkah. That's Rav Moshe. Now, what's the pshat in Rav Moshe? People don't like staying in jail. They don't. Rabbi said Corona has taught us people don't like staying at home. So what do you want from this guy? Isn't it Teshuvah going to do that he should be able to go out? So I guess the Hagdar has to be that what would happen if a person was told every second that he's in his house, he gets $1 million. So then every second is not, does he soak it in and does. You have to always weigh things in life. There's a famous Yisayid V'Sherish Avodah. Yisayid V'Sherish Avodah says that any second you're out of the sukkah, you're mevatel a mitzvah saseh, which is a pella. It's a pella, la'alach, it's a pella. But Shlomo Zalman, just to appreciate the sugya, says, what's the pshat? He says, and what if I would tell you that I'm giving you $1 million every time you stay, every second that you stay in the sukkah? So you would stay and stay and stay and stay. So then so then you wouldn't leave the sukkah. You would never leave the sukkah. So then after Shlomo Zalman, so every single second you're in the sukkah, you're getting $1 million. So if you're leaving the sukkah, whoa, what's Teshuvah going to do? You obviously don't appreciate sukkah. Now that's not lalacha, but it's an attitude. But if I had to give, and this is, I think, one of the most important things of today, if I had to give, Ad Kedei Kach, the Munkatra says, that's why in the Gemara, that Amoira was told by Rav, take your canopy and stay in the sukkah. He's not yaitz in the mitzvah of sukkah, but just be as close as you can to the sukkah. The Heiligkeit of the sukkah, the Ushpizin of the sukkah, the Kedusha of the sukkah. But let me tell you one Agdara that can help you maybe determine if you have a tour of Mitzvah Pater Min Sukkah. The Buchacha says that, and this is a very big aside, the Buchacha says that, let's say, because the Rabbi says it's very difficult to find a prabha. Let's say a person, he's in his living room and he has, all of a sudden, it's freezing cold. Now, let's say he has another room right next door and it's not freezing cold in there. So would he leave that room to go to the other room? Of course. So we can't use that as our measuring stick. Avada, if I have a better room, of course I'd leave to a better room. On Sukkos, your better room is your sukkah, because that becomes your dira. At what point would I leave my ikr dira, says the Buchacha, which I'm explaining the Buchacha, and it's based on the Havana that I understood from the Marsham in Aleph Lamed Gimel. At what point would you leave your nice house to go to a garage, let's say? For example, if you told me I have a house across the street, which is a beautiful house, and I own my house here and I own my house there, and it's freezing in this house, it wouldn't take that much to get me to go from here to there. So that can't be the problem. And that's not a fair measuring stick, because sukkah, the ikr, is your sukkah. And my bias becomes my dir sarai. So at what point would you leave your comfort house to go to a house which is not so geschmack? So for example, in my house, let's say my bedroom is freezing. Okay, I have a machsan, I have a garage, which has 2 beds, and it's definitely, the heater's in there, it works, it's warm, but it's not geschmack. At what point would you leave your bedroom and go to your machsan? Says the Buchacha, the way the Marsham explains it, that's how you have to make your decisions on sukkahs. At what point, you can't say, at what point would I leave my sukkah to go into my comfortable house? Shkoyach. I would leave if there's any breach in comfort. It has to be, at what point would I leave? If I was in my bedroom right now, which is my regular bedroom or my regular living room, and there was something, is hot in here, at what point would you go into a room which doesn't have this issue, but it's not the Gishmaka room? It's a Dira Sarai. It's not your Gishmaka room. That's a prabha to try to figure out how a person should do it. Certainly, when it comes to learning, if a person learns better in a base medrash, there's no question that he can't learn the sugya. But avada, we must remember the words of the Yaris Tvash in the Drush, in the 6th Drush, where he talks about how avada, the learning has a tremendous koyach when he learns together with the Ushpizin, with the Telta Munusa, and that's avada Meridik Azach. There's no question that that's a tremendous maila. The Maisa, I'll just be Messiah with the Shaila that many people ask. Maisa, we know that there are many tzaddikim that they went into the sukkah when it was raining, when it was freezing, and they would stay in the sukkah, And what's the pshat in these people? And Shraga in Aleph Lamed Hey discusses it, and Beis Lamed Tessi discusses it. What's the pshat, L'maisa? So he says, Meridik Yisaid, Mamash Meridik Yisaid. He said, and I found that loy mevai, that's no shaila, that if Chazal pattered you from coming back to the sukkah because you went to sleep and you're matriach yourself to go to the sukkah, loy mevai, you're not a headed. That's no shaila. You can even make a bracha because when you'll be in the sukkah, you'll enjoy it. But the questions on these great tzaddikim, it was raining, it was freezing, it was boiling, and they came to the sukkah. So he says, he says that the whole heter of mitzvah pater sukkah is like we said the whole time, that if I'll leave the sukkah, so then I'll get rid of the tsar. Over here, Abaisai, this year, this poor tzaddik, he's going to be knechting, the sukkah. When can the tzaddik get into the sukkah? So such a person, he's going to have tsar. And the Saris B'tshuva in Tav Kav Ches, this is over 100 years ago, and he says, there's people today, they'll stay in a theater. This is when theaters didn't have air conditioning. This is when you're allowed to smoke, and the air was gefährlich, and the smoke was gefährlich, and the heat was gefährlich, and they'll stay there for hours in the theater watching all this mishigas. Right? It's not even some good TV program from the Agoda, some Gavaldik Geshir. And they sit there. Why? Because they don't have tsar. They don't have tsar. So if you have a tzaddik and he's in the sukkah and he understands that the sukkah is a tel to the nun, and he understands he's the closest to the Heilige Bashefer, and he understands that when it's raining, all the diamonds that you're throwing at the person when he's in the sukkah, then he's a person that his tsar is going to be from leaving the sukkah. The Eibush is helping Taka that we should be zeicha this year to be able to be Mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah with all halacha, with all the diktukim, with all of the simcha, and to be zeicha to feel that gewaldige closeness of the Heilige Bashefer. I don't know if I'll be zeicha to see my friends again, Rabbi said before Rosh Hashanah. So the Eibush will bench in the ganze Olam mit aksiva, chsima, toiva, git, gebench the yor, mit Yeshuas and gulas for all of us, and for the Aguda Bifrat, Klal Yisrael at large, and the Rebbeinu Shalom should be Mizakas, the Bez Hashem, finally, Yavai, Mashiach, Tzidkein, B'mheida, B'yameinu, Amen.